The authorities confiscated my house and $1 million because I refused to listen to my son-in-law, an arrogant Wall Street fraudster. When they changed the locks and said, "Go live in a shelter, Grandpa," I called 911. What happened next made them pale with horror. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock on July 1st, just like Emily had promised. I set down my coffee mug and limped to the front door, my old Vietnam injury acting up again in the summer heat. Through the peephole, I could see my daughter's perfectly styled blonde hair and her husband Mark's expensive suit gleaming in the Cleveland sunshine. "Dad!" Emily's voice carried that forced cheerfulness I'd grown to recognize over the years. She wrapped me in a hug that felt rehearsed, her designer perfume overwhelming the familiar scent of my aftershave. Mark stepped forward with his practiced Wall Street smile, extending a manicured hand. "Robert, good to see you again." I gripped his hand firmly, noting how he tried to assert dominance with his squeeze. At 75, I might be slowing down, but my grip still held the strength of decades working construction before the war took that from me, too. Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I've got iced tea in the kitchen." They settled into my living room like they owned the place. Mark's eyes swept across the room, taking inventory of my modest furniture, the photographs of my late wife, Martha, on the mantel, and the small collection of military medals displayed in a shadow box. "Dad, the house looks—" Emily paused, searching for words. "It looks exactly the same." "Why would I change it? Your mother picked out most of this furniture. Still serves its purpose." Mark leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Actually, Robert, that's part of why we're here today. We've been thinking about your future, about what's best for you." Something in his tone made me set my glass down carefully. I'd heard that tone before, in boardrooms and negotiation tables. It was the voice of someone about to deliver bad news, wrapped in concern. "My future seems just fine to me," I replied evenly. Emily shot a glance at her husband, then looked back at me with those big blue eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Dad, we're worried about you living here alone. You're not getting any younger, and this big house, it's a lot of responsibility." "I manage just fine." "But for how long?" Mark interjected, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "What happens when you can't climb those stairs anymore? What happens when you fall and no one's around to help?" The afternoon light streaming through my windows suddenly felt harsh. I studied my son-in-law's face, noting the way his jaw tightened when he spoke about my limitations, as if my age was a personal inconvenience to him. "I appreciate your concern," I said slowly, "but I'm not ready for a nursing home." "Who said anything about a nursing home?" Emily's laugh sounded brittle. "We're talking about something much better than that." Mark pulled out a leather portfolio from his briefcase, the kind that screamed expensive lawyer or high-end consultant. "We've found an excellent assisted living community in Florida. Beautiful weather, great activities, people your own age." "And what about my house?" "Well," Mark's smile widened, "that's where our expertise comes in. I have connections in real estate, and Emily and I could handle the sale for you. Take that burden right off your shoulders." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Martha's old grandfather clock. I looked at my daughter, searching her face for some sign of the little girl who used to help me in the garden, who used to cry when she stepped on ants because she didn't want to hurt anything. "And my money?" I asked quietly. "Your money would be safe," Mark assured me, his fingers drumming against the portfolio. "In fact, I could invest it for you, double it within a year. I have access to opportunities that most people never see." There it was, the real reason for this visit, not concern for my well-being, not love for a family patriarch, but the cold calculation of profit. I felt something twist in my chest, a combination of heartbreak and anger that I hadn't experienced since Martha's funeral. Emily reached across and took my hand. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. We want you to be comfortable and safe." I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the softness of her skin, the wedding ring that Mark had bought her, the life she'd built so far from the values I'd tried to teach her. "I need some time to think about this," I said. Mark's jaw tightened again. "Of course, take all the time you need. But don't take too long, Robert. Opportunities like this don't wait forever." After they left, I sat in my empty living room as the shadows grew longer. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm, marking time that suddenly felt much more precious than it had that morning. The next morning brought rain, the kind of steady drizzle that made my old bones ache. I'd barely slept, replaying yesterday's conversation over and over in my mind. By the time Emily called at 8:30, I was already dressed and sitting at my kitchen table with the morning paper. Dad, I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been up since 5, sweetheart. You know how it is. Her laugh sounded forced. Right, of course. Listen, Mark and I were talking last night, and we really think this Florida thing could be perfect for you. I did some research online, and the facility has a pool, a library, even a workshop where you could tinker with things like you used to. I stared out my kitchen window at the neighbor's garden where Mrs. Patterson was tending to her roses despite the rain. She was 82 and still lived alone, still drove herself to the grocery store every Thursday. Emily, can I ask you something? Of course, Dad. When your mother was sick, what did she tell you about taking care of family? There was a pause. She said family always comes first. That's right. She said we take care of each other, not take from each other. I don't understand what you mean. But I could hear in her voice that she understood perfectly. Your mother left me this house, Emily. She left me my independence, and she taught you better than what you're trying to do here. Dad, you're being dramatic. We're trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourselves. The line went quiet, except for the sound of her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more like the daughter I remembered. Mark says the investment is guaranteed. He says we could all benefit from it. And what do you say, Emily? What does my daughter say, not Mark's wife? I don't know anymore, Dad. Things are complicated. Money is tight, and Mark has these opportunities. Money's always tight, sweetheart. That's not new. What's new is thinking you can solve it by stealing from your father. We're not stealing. You're just what? Go ahead and say it. She started crying then, soft sobs that carried me back to when she was 7 years old and had broken Martha's favorite vase. The same helpless sound, the same shame. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. But Mark says if we don't do this, if we don't find a way to make more money, we might lose the house in New York. The mortgage payments are crushing us, and his job, the market's been difficult. Now we were getting to the truth. So you thought you'd solve your problems with my life savings. It's not like that. It's exactly like that, Emily, and you know it. I heard Mark's voice in the background, sharp and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. Emily's crying stopped abruptly. Dad, I have to go, but please, just think about what we talked about. Think about your future. I'm thinking about it, sweetheart. I'm thinking about it very carefully. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, listening to the rain against the windows. Martha's photograph on the refrigerator seemed to be watching me, her kind eyes holding the same disappointment I felt in my chest. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd need to use. Reed Investigations, Jack speaking. Jack, it's Robert Thompson. We met at the VFW last year. Robert, of course. How are you holding up? I need your help with something involving my family. Family's always the hardest cases, Robert. You sure about this? I looked around my kitchen at the home Martha and I had built together, at the life I'd carved out of 50 years of honest work and careful saving. I'm sure, Jack. I think my daughter and her husband are planning to rob me blind, and I need to know exactly what they're up to before they do it. I'll be over this afternoon. Thank you, Jack. Don't thank me yet, Robert. In cases like this, you might not like what I find. But as I hung up the phone, I realized I already knew what he would find. The question wasn't whether Emily and Mark were planning to cheat me. It was how far they were willing to go to do it. Jack Reed arrived at 3 o'clock sharp, carrying a worn leather briefcase and the bearing of a man who'd seen too much in his 20 years as a Cleveland police detective. Now in his 50s, with gray threading through his dark hair, he had the careful eyes of someone who'd learned to trust nobody and verify everything. Coffee? I offered as he settled into my living room chair. Black, if you've got it. I poured 2 cups and sat across from him, noting how he'd positioned himself to see both the front door and the back hallway. Old habits. Tell me what's going on, Robert. I laid out yesterday's visit, Emily's phone call this morning, and the growing certainty in my gut that something was very wrong. Jack listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. "The Florida facilities," he said when I finished. "They give you a name?" "Sunset Gardens. Mark said it was in Tampa." Jack made another note. "And the investment opportunity? He mentioned any specifics?" "Just that he could double my money in a year through his connections." "Uh-huh." Jack's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Robert, I'm going to be straight with you. What you're describing sounds like a classic setup. The assisted living story gets you out of the picture, the power of attorney gives them control of your assets, and the investment scheme makes the money disappear legally. But Emily's my daughter. She might not even know she's part of a con, Robert. Some of these guys are good at making their wives think they're legitimate businessmen." Jack opened his briefcase and pulled out a contract. "I'm going to need you to sign this, and I'm going to need a retainer. $500 to start, and I bill at $50 an hour plus expenses." I signed without hesitation and wrote him a check. "How long will this take?" "Give me a week. I'll run background checks on Mark, verify his employment, check into this Florida place. I'll also set up some discreet surveillance to see what they're really up to." "Surveillance?" "Sometimes people reveal their true intentions when they think nobody's watching." That evening I called Emily back. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to do. "Dad, I was hoping you'd call. Mark and I have been talking, and we really think—" "I've made a decision, Emily." "You have?" Her voice brightened immediately. "I want to see the paperwork, all of it. The Florida facility information, the investment details, everything." "Of course. Mark will be so pleased. He's already started preparing the documents you'll need to sign." "Documents I'll need to sign. Not information for me to review, but papers for me to execute." The distinction wasn't lost on me. "When can you bring them over?" "How about this weekend? Saturday afternoon? Mark wants to go over everything carefully with you. Make sure you understand all the benefits." "Saturday sounds fine." "Oh, Dad, this is wonderful. You're going to love Florida, and the money—" Mark says with his contacts, we could see returns of up to 200%, maybe more. 200%. The number hung in the air like a bad joke. In my 40 years of working construction and then managing the crew, I'd never seen a legitimate investment promise anything close to that. "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Anything, Dad?" "Do you remember what your mother used to say about deals that sound too good to be true?" There was a pause. She said they usually are." "That's right, sweetheart. She was a smart woman, your mother." "Dad, are you having second thoughts? Because Mark says—" "I'm not having second thoughts, Emily. I'm just remembering your mother's wisdom." After we hung up, I walked through my house, really looking at it for the first time in months. The hardwood floors Martha and I had refinished ourselves. The kitchen where she'd taught Emily to bake cookies. The living room where we'd hosted Christmas mornings and birthday parties and quiet Sunday afternoons, reading the paper together. They wanted to take all of this away from me, sell it, and disappear my life savings into some scheme that would benefit everyone except the man who'd spent 50 years earning it. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. They'd forgotten that I'd survived Vietnam, built a successful business, and raised a family on principles that didn't include stealing from the people who loved you. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I found myself almost looking forward to Saturday afternoon, because by then Jack would have started his investigation, and I would have a much clearer picture of exactly who I was dealing with. The grandfather clock chimed 11 times as I reached the top of the stairs, its steady rhythm a reminder that time was indeed precious, and that some people had already wasted far too much of mine. Jack called me Thursday morning while I was nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint my kitchen walls. Gold. 3 days of digging had given him more than either of us expected. "Robert, you need to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting, Jack. What did you find?" "Sunset Gardens doesn't exist. The Tampa address they gave you. It's a vacant lot. Has been for 2 years. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. And Mark's investment opportunity? Classic Ponzi scheme. I found 3 other families in New York who lost everything to the exact same pitch. Same promises, same documentation, same disappearing act afterward. The pieces clicked together in my mind, like ammunition sliding into a rifle chamber. How long has this been going on? At least 18 months, maybe longer. Robert, your daughter, she might not know the full extent of what her husband's been doing. Or she might know exactly what she was doing. Either way, I had a decision to make. What's our next step? I'm going to be recording everything on Saturday. I've got equipment that'll pick up conversations from 3 rooms away. But Robert, you need to be careful. If they suspect you know something, let me worry about that, Jack. These two forgot who they're dealing with. Friday dragged by like a week. I cleaned my house twice, organized my papers 3 times, and called Martha's grave like I did every Friday, telling her about our daughter's betrayal. The roses I'd planted by her headstone last spring were blooming now, bright red against the gray marble. Saturday afternoon arrived with the punctuality of death itself. Emily's car pulled into my driveway at exactly 2 o'clock, Mark's confident stride already visible through the windshield. I watched them gather their briefcase and manila folders, weapons disguised as paperwork. Jack's surveillance van was parked 3 houses down, disguised as a cable repair truck. Through my kitchen window, I could see him adjusting equipment inside. The doorbell rang. "Dad!" Emily's smile was brighter than usual, almost manic. "Are you ready to start your new life?" Mark swept past her, carrying his briefcase like a conqueror's banner. "Robert, today's the day we make you rich." They spread their documents across my dining room table with the efficiency of undertakers laying out burial clothes, power of attorney forms, property transfer deeds, investment contracts promising returns that would make lottery winners weep with envy. "See here," Mark pointed with his gold pen, "this gives Emily and me the authority to manage your assets while you're settling into your new home in Florida. And this," Emily added, her voice trembling slightly, "transfers the house deed temporarily, just until we can get the best price for it." I picked up the power of attorney document, noting the signature line where my name was already filled in with someone else's handwriting. The forgery was excellent, almost perfect. Almost. "You've both put a lot of work into this." Mark's chest puffed with pride. "I have connections, Robert. People who can make things happen quickly and quietly." "I'm sure you do." I set the document down carefully. "Emily, sweetheart, can you get me a glass of water? This is a lot to process." She jumped up eagerly, desperate to be helpful, to wash away whatever guilt was gnawing at her conscience. The moment she left for the kitchen, Mark leaned forward like a shark sensing blood. "Between you and me, Robert, the sooner we get this done, the better. Emily's been worried sick about you living here alone. This solution benefits everyone." "Even you?" His smile sharpened. "Especially me. I'm going to make sure your money works harder than it ever has before." Emily returned with my water, her hands shaking slightly as she set it down. "Dad, are you feeling all right? You look pale." "Just thinking about everything changing so fast." I took a sip of water, buying time, letting them settle into their confidence. "Mark, can you walk me through exactly how this investment works?" For the next 20 minutes, he painted a picture of guaranteed returns, offshore accounts, and connections that would make my modest savings multiply like biblical fishes and loaves. Emily nodded along, her relief growing with each lie he told. Finally, Mark slid the pen across the table toward me. "All we need is your signature, Robert. Right here, here, and here." I picked up the pen, feeling its weight, noting how Jack's recording equipment would be capturing every word. The moment of truth had arrived, and Mark was about to learn what happened when someone tried to outsmart a man who'd survived both war and peace. "You know what, Mark? I think I need to make a phone call first." His confident smile flickered. "A phone call? To who?" I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed 3 simple numbers. 911. What's your emergency?" Mark's face went white as fresh snow. Emily dropped her water glass, sending shards across my hardwood floor like fallen stars. "Yes, hello. I need to report a crime in progress. My name is Robert Thompson, and I'm at 412 Maple Street in Parma. My daughter and son-in-law are attempting to steal my house and life savings through forged documents." The dispatcher's voice crackled through my phone speaker. "Sir, are you in immediate danger?" "Not physical danger, but they're trying to force me to sign fraudulent papers right now." Mark lunged for my phone, but 40 years of construction work had left me stronger than my age suggested. I held it away from him easily. "Sir, officers are en route. Please stay on the line." Emily was hyperventilating now, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. "Dad, what are you doing? We're family." "Family doesn't steal from family, sweetheart." Mark had recovered from his initial shock and was scrambling to gather up the documents. "This is insane, Robert. You've lost your mind. Emily, we're leaving. Now." "Actually, you're not." I walked to my front door and opened it wide, letting the afternoon breeze carry the sound of approaching sirens into my house. Mark froze like a deer caught in headlights, his hands full of incriminating evidence. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Can't I?" I pulled out my phone again and scrolled to a recording I'd made earlier in the week. "Jack's equipment isn't the only thing that records conversations, Mark." The first police car pulled into my driveway, just as Mark's recording began playing from my phone. "Emily, we'll just sign for him. The old man won't notice anything, and when he does, it'll be too late." Emily's sob cut through the air like a blade. "Mark, you said we were just helping him." Two officers approached my front door with the measured steps of men who'd seen every kind of human foolishness. The older one had gray temples and tired eyes that had witnessed too many family betrayals. His younger partner looked fresh from the academy, eager and alert. "Good afternoon, officers. I'm Robert Thompson. I called about the attempted fraud." Officer Johnson, according to his name tag, surveyed the scene, scattered documents, Emily's tear-stained face, Mark's panicked expression, and my unusual calm. "Mr. Thompson, can you explain what's happening here?" "My daughter and her husband came here today to steal my house and my savings. They brought forged documents and tried to pressure me into signing them." Mark stepped forward, his Wall Street training kicking in. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding. My father-in-law is elderly and confused. We're simply trying to help him manage his affairs." "I'm 75 years old, not brain-dead," I replied evenly, "and I have evidence of their fraud." Officer Smith, the younger one, was examining the documents Mark had dropped, in his haste to leave. "Sir, did you sign any of these papers?" "Not yet. But look at the signature lines. They've already been filled in with my name, in handwriting that clearly isn't mine." Johnson took the documents and compared them to my driver's license. Even from across the room, I could see him frowning at the obvious differences. "Mr. Wilson, is it? Can you explain why Mr. Thompson's signature appears to be pre-written on these forms?" Mark's confidence was cracking like ice in spring. That's just a sample signature, for reference purposes." "Reference for what?" Emily suddenly found her voice. "Officers, please. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. My father asked us to help him with his finances, and we were just—" "Emily," my voice cut through her explanation, "stop lying. You're already in enough trouble." Smith was photographing the documents now, while Johnson continued his questioning. "Mr. Thompson, you mentioned having evidence of fraud. What kind of evidence?" I scrolled through my phone's recordings. "I have audio recordings of my son-in-law admitting to forging documents and planning to steal my property. I also have photographs of similar schemes he's run on other families." Mark's face had gone from white to gray. "You can't record private conversations without consent. Actually, in Ohio, I can record any conversation I'm part of. And since this is my house, I had every right to document what was happening here." Johnson exchanged a look with his partner. 20 years on the force had taught him to recognize guilt when he saw it. "Mr. Wilson, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." "You can't arrest me. I have connections. I'll have your badges." But as Johnson cuffed him, Mark's threats sounded hollow, the desperate bluster of a man whose careful plans had collapsed in spectacular fashion. Emily collapsed into my living room chair, her designer clothes wrinkled, her perfect makeup ruined. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." I looked at my daughter, this stranger who shared my blood, and felt something break inside my chest that would never heal completely. "Some things, Emily, can't be undone with apologies." Officer Smith was reading Mark his Miranda rights when Jack's surveillance van pulled up, right on schedule. Through my window, I watched him emerge with professional recording equipment and a satisfied expression that told me everything had been captured. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mark's struggles against the handcuffs were pathetic, like a fish flopping on dry land. "This is harassment. I demand to speak to my lawyer immediately." "You'll get your phone call at the station," Johnson replied calmly. He'd clearly dealt with Mark's type before, wealthy men who believed money could buy them out of any consequence. Emily sat frozen in my chair, watching her husband being arrested with the hollow expression of someone whose world had just imploded. When Smith approached her with his notebook, she flinched like he was carrying a weapon. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about your involvement in this scheme." I didn't know it was illegal. Mark said we were helping Dad manage his money better." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Even Emily seemed to realize how unconvincing it sounded. I pulled out my phone again and found a different recording. "Officer, you might want to hear this conversation from 3 days ago." Emily's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "Dad, we just want what's best for you. We want you to be comfortable and safe." Then Mark's voice, more distant but audible. "Get him to sign everything today. Once we have power of attorney, the old man won't be able to stop us, even if he figures it out." Emily's face crumpled. "Dad, how could you record us? We're family." "Family doesn't try to steal everything I've worked 50 years to build." Johnson finished with Mark and turned his attention to Emily. "Ma'am, based on what we've heard here today, I'm placing you under arrest as well for conspiracy to commit fraud." "No, please. I have children to think about. This was all Mark's idea." "Tell it to the judge," Smith said, not unkindly, but without sympathy. As they led Emily toward the second police car that had arrived, she turned back to me one last time. "Dad, please don't let them take me away from my kids." "You should have thought about your children before you tried to rob their grandfather." The words came out harder than I'd intended, but watching her face crumble didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. This was my daughter, the little girl who used to help me build birdhouses in the garage, who used to fall asleep on my lap while I read her stories. Mark was loaded into the first police car, still shouting about his connections and his lawyers. Through the window, I could see him trying to use his one phone call, probably hoping someone on Wall Street would magically make this all disappear. Emily went more quietly, her shoulders shaking with sobs that reminded me too much of her mother's tears when Martha had learned her cancer was terminal. Jack approached my front door as the police cars pulled away, carrying what remained of my family toward whatever justice awaited them. "Robert, you did the right thing." "Did I?" I looked at the scattered documents on my dining room table, the evidence of their betrayal mixed with the wreckage of our relationship. I just destroyed my only child's life. She destroyed her own life the moment she decided to steal from you. You just refused to be a victim. The neighbor's dog was barking at all the commotion, and Mrs. Patterson from next door was standing on her porch, watching the drama unfold with the fascination of someone whose life had been considerably more boring until today. What happens now? Now the legal system takes over. With the evidence we have, they'll likely plead guilty to avoid trial. Mark will probably get serious prison time, especially if they find other victims. Emily? Jack shrugged. First offense, cooperating witness, kids involved. She might get probation. I sat down at my dining room table, suddenly feeling every one of my 75 years. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before, the silence of abandonment rather than peace. You know what the worst part is, Jack? What's that? I still love her. After everything she tried to do to me, she's still my little girl, and I still love her. Jack gathered up the scattered documents, evidence now in a criminal case. Love doesn't mean you have to let people destroy you, Robert. Sometimes loving someone means setting boundaries they don't want to accept. Through my kitchen window, I could see Martha's rose garden blooming in the afternoon sun. Tomorrow I would visit her grave and tell her how our daughter had chosen greed over family, how the girl we'd raised with such hope and pride had tried to steal the life we'd built together. But today I had survived. Today the old soldier had won his last battle, even though victory tasted more like ash than triumph. The phone rang, probably a reporter. News of wealthy people getting arrested always traveled fast in small towns. I let it ring, listening to the sound echo through my empty house, where family photographs still smiled down from the walls, frozen in happier times when love seemed stronger than money. The Cleveland police station looked different in daylight, less dramatic than yesterday's chaos, more bureaucratic. Detective Thomas White had the weathered face of a man who'd spent 20 years listening to people lie about money, family, and trust. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in. I know yesterday was difficult." We settled into interview room 3, a sterile space with fluorescent lights that made everyone look guilty. I'd brought my folder of documents, organized the way Martha used to arrange her recipe cards, everything in its proper place. "I want to make sure we have the complete timeline," Detective White said, opening his notebook. "When did you first suspect your daughter and son-in-law were planning to defraud you?" "July 1st, the moment they walked into my house with their Florida fairy tale." He wrote notes in careful script. "But you didn't contact police immediately." "No, I contacted someone better." The interview room door opened, and Jack Reed entered carrying a briefcase that looked like it weighed 40 pounds. He set it down with the deliberate care of a man handling evidence that could put people behind bars for decades. "Detective White, I'm Jack Reed, private investigator. Mr. Thompson hired me 4 days ago to document this fraud." White's eyebrows rose slightly. "4 days ago? You've been investigating since July 2nd? "I started background checks immediately. Mark Wilson isn't just a failed Wall Street broker. He's a professional con artist. What happened to Mr. Thompson yesterday was the culmination of an 18-month pattern of elder financial abuse." Jack opened his briefcase like a surgeon unveiling instruments. Bank statements, surveillance photographs, typed interview transcripts. The evidence of Mark's greed spread across the table like a cancer diagnosis. "We documented everything," Jack continued. "Mark's meeting with Richard Stone, the notary who falsified documents for a $10,000 bribe. The offshore accounts where he's been hiding stolen money. The 3 other families in New York who lost their life savings to identical schemes." Detective White studied a surveillance photograph showing Mark shaking hands with a thin man outside a Cleveland notary office. "You have this Richard Stone on tape taking bribes?" "Audio and video, plus his signed confession as of this morning. He's cooperating fully to avoid federal charges." My throat felt dry. "How much money are we talking about, Jack?" "Across all his victims? Nearly $4 million. Your case was supposed to be his retirement score." The number hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. $4 million stolen from elderly people who'd worked their entire lives to build modest security. People like me who'd survived wars and recessions and trusted their children to love them more than money. "Mr. Thompson," Detective White said, "I need you to walk me through yesterday's events one more time. Every detail matters for the prosecution." For the next hour, I recounted Mark's arrogance, Emily's guilt, the moment I dialed 911 with their forged documents, spread across my dining room table like a dealer's marked cards. Jack supplemented my testimony with photographs, recordings, financial analyses that painted Mark as a predator who turned family love into a weapon. "Your daughter," Detective White said carefully, "she's been cooperating with our investigation." "Cooperating how?" "She's provided details about Mark's other schemes, his contacts, his methods. She claims she didn't understand the full scope of his criminal activities." Through the interview room's small window, I could see Cleveland's skyline, the city where I'd built my life with Martha, raised Emily, believed that family meant something sacred. Now that same city was where my daughter was betraying her husband to save herself from prison. Will she testify against him? Most likely. Her cooperation could significantly reduce her own sentence. Jack closed his briefcase with the satisfied snap of a job completed. "Detective, with the evidence we've compiled, Mark Wilson is looking at serious federal time, document forgery, wire fraud, elder abuse across state lines. We're talking 7 to 10 years minimum." Detective White gathered his notes. "Mr. Thompson, we'll need you available for testimony when this goes to trial. Based on the evidence, I expect Mark will try to plead guilty to avoid a longer sentence." "When will that be?" "Probably within the month. Federal prosecutors move quickly on cases this solid." I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 75 years. Yesterday I'd been a victim. Today I was a witness. Tomorrow I'd be a man whose family had been destroyed by greed, but whose dignity remained intact. "Detective, can I ask you something?" Of course. In your experience, do families ever recover from something like this? He looked at me with the sad wisdom of someone who'd seen money destroy more relationships than alcohol, drugs, or adultery combined. Mr. Thompson, some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt, but sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. 2 weeks crawled by like wounded animals. The house felt different now, not violated exactly, but changed in ways I couldn't name. Every room held echoes of Saturday's confrontation. Every corner whispered reminders that the daughter I'd raised had tried to steal everything I'd worked to build. The phone rang constantly, reporters wanting quotes about family betrayal, lawyers explaining legal procedures, bank officials apologizing for nearly allowing the fraud to succeed. I answered some calls, ignored others, and learned to let the machine sort truth from noise. Jack called Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee taste like victory. Robert, they raided Mark's office in New York yesterday. FBI Financial Crimes Unit, boxes of evidence, computer servers, the whole production. Turns out your case was just the tip of an iceberg that could sink the Titanic. What did they find? 4 additional victims, all elderly, all swindled using variations of the same Florida retirement scam. One couple in Buffalo lost their entire pension, $600,000. Mark was running a sophisticated operation complete with fake websites, professional-looking brochures, even hired actors to pose as satisfied residents of non-existent facilities. I set my coffee down carefully. Professional actors? The whole thing was theater, Robert. Pure, calculated theater designed to steal life savings from people who'd earned their security through honest work. Through my kitchen window, I watched Mrs. Patterson tending her garden, same as she'd done every morning for the 20 years I'd lived here. Steady, predictable, honest, the kind of life Mark would never understand because he'd spent his career believing that cleverness could replace character. Thursday brought another call, this one from someone I'd never expected to hear from. Mr. Thompson, this is Assistant District Attorney Lisa Anderson. I'm prosecuting your case, and I wanted to update you on recent developments. I'm listening. Emily has agreed to testify against her husband in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's provided detailed information about Mark's criminal network, including names of other victims and evidence of systematic fraud dating back 3 years. 3 years? Minimum. We think it may go back further, but financial records before 2022 were deliberately destroyed. Your son-in-law is looking at federal charges that could put him away for a decade or more. That afternoon, I drove to the bank where Mark had tried to steal my money. Manager Michael Green met me personally, his handshake nervous, his apologies flowing like water from a broken dam. Mr. Thompson, I can't express how sorry we are about this situation. Our security protocols should have caught the irregularities immediately. Should have, but didn't. No, sir, they didn't. As compensation for our failure, the bank is crediting your account with additional interest and waiving all fees related to this incident. We've also implemented new verification procedures to prevent similar fraud. He handed me a statement showing my account balance. 1,247,892.43. More money than I'd ever seen in one place, returned with interest, as if Mark's betrayal had accidentally made me richer. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't cost me my family. Friday evening, Jack stopped by with a bottle of bourbon and the final details of the investigation. Richard Stone confessed to everything, he said, settling into Martha's old chair. Turns out Mark had been bribing him for over a year, falsifying documents for multiple fraud schemes. Stone's looking at 5 years federal time, but he'll probably serve 3 with good behavior. And the other victims? Getting their money back, mostly. Mark was smart enough to keep the stolen funds in recoverable accounts, rather than spending it all immediately. He was building towards something bigger, probably planning to disappear overseas once he hit a certain target number. I poured bourbon into 2 glasses, the amber liquid catching the evening light like liquid gold. How much bigger? Based on his computer files, he was targeting $10 million total, then planning to vanish to a non-extradition country. Your case was supposed to put him over $8 million. We drank in silence, 2 old men contemplating the mathematics of betrayal. $8 million stolen from people who'd trusted their families, their banks, their government to protect the security they'd spent lifetimes building. Jack, Can I ask you something personal? Shoot. In your years investigating fraud cases, family cases, do the victims ever really recover? He stared into his bourbon like it held answers. Financially? Usually. Emotionally? He shrugged. That depends on the person. Some people let betrayal poison everything else in their lives. Others use it as fertilizer to grow something stronger. The phone rang. I let it go to the machine, but the caller's voice stopped both of us cold. Dad, it's Emily. Please pick up. I know you're there. The trial is scheduled for next month, and I need to talk to you before then. There are things you don't know. Things about Mark that I should have told you years ago. Please, Dad. I'm still your daughter. The machine clicked off, leaving us in silence thick as fog. Outside, the evening shadows were growing longer, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 7 times. Jack finished his bourbon and stood up. That's your decision to make, Robert. But whatever you decide, make sure it's what's best for you, not what's easiest for her. After he left, I sat alone in my living room, looking at family photographs and wondering if love could survive complete betrayal, or if some wounds were too deep for forgiveness to reach. The trial was scheduled for August 9th. 3 weeks to decide whether I still had a daughter worth saving, or just a stranger who shared my blood and had helped a criminal try to steal my life. The Cuyahoga County Courthouse rose from downtown Cleveland like a monument to justice, its limestone facade weathered by decades of rain, snow, and human drama. I'd worn my best Navy suit, the one Emily bought me for her wedding 5 years ago, when Mark still pretended to be a decent man. Security screening felt like airport theater, but I appreciated the metal detectors. Some family betrayals cut deep enough to make people do desperate things. Courtroom 4B was larger than I'd expected, with tall windows that let in morning light and wooden benches that looked like church pews. Appropriate, since we were here to witness either resurrection or burial of whatever remained of my family. Judge Margaret Cole entered with the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years sorting truth from lies. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, her black robes crisp as fresh newspaper. She surveyed the courtroom with eyes that had seen every variety of human foolishness. The state of Ohio versus Mark Wilson and Emily Wilson, she announced. We are here for sentencing following guilty pleas entered by both defendants. Guilty pleas. They'd avoided trial by confessing, which meant Emily had kept her promise to cooperate fully. I wasn't sure if that made me proud or disgusted. Mark sat at the defendant's table looking like a different man. Gone were the expensive suits and confident posture. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on shoulders that seemed to have shrunk since his arrest. When he glanced back toward the gallery, his eyes found mine for just a moment before darting away like a guilty dog. Emily sat separately, her lawyer whispering last-minute instructions. She looked fragile in her plain blue dress, her hair pulled back simply, makeup minimal. This was Emily trying to appear sympathetic, remorseful, worthy of mercy. The performance might have worked if I hadn't seen her practice similar acts for 45 years. Prosecutor Lisa Anderson stood to address the court. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the confident bearing of someone who'd built her career on cases exactly like this one. Your Honor, the defendants orchestrated a sophisticated fraud scheme targeting elderly victims across multiple states. Mr. Mark Wilson led this operation, stealing over $4 million from senior citizens who trusted him with their life savings. Mrs. Emily Wilson aided and abetted these crimes by helping her husband gain access to her father, Robert Thompson, who is present in court today. Judge Cole looked directly at me. Mr. Thompson, would you like to make a victim impact statement? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, the finality of what we were doing here. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about whether family bonds could survive complete betrayal. Your Honor, I've served my country in Vietnam. I've buried my wife of 40 years. I've survived recession, job losses, and more challenges than most people face in a lifetime. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own daughter tried to steal everything I'd worked to build. My voice carried clearly through the courtroom. In the gallery, I could see reporters taking notes, other victims of Mark's schemes nodding in recognition. The money can be returned, My house can be secured. But the trust between a father and daughter, once broken by greed, can never be fully repaired. That's the real crime here. Not just theft of assets, but theft of love, family, and the security that comes from believing your children will take care of you rather than take advantage of you. I sat down to silence that felt respectful rather than awkward. Judge Cole made notes before addressing the defendants. Mr. Wilson, you have pleaded guilty to federal charges of wire fraud, document forgery, and elder financial abuse. The evidence shows a pattern of predatory behavior targeting some of our most vulnerable citizens. You exploited family relationships and violated positions of trust for personal gain. Mark's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client is prepared to make full restitution and has cooperated completely with federal investigators to help recover funds stolen from other victims. Cooperation noted, Judge Cole replied curtly. However, the scope and sophistication of these crimes demands significant consequences. I sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised probation and full restitution to all victims. 8 years. Mark would be 53 when he got out, his Wall Street career finished, his reputation destroyed, his marriage almost certainly dissolved. He absorbed the sentence with the blank expression of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. Mrs. Wilson, Judge Cole continued, your cooperation with authorities and your status as a first-time offender weigh in your favor. However, you participated in the financial abuse of your own father, which represents a particularly egregious violation of family trust. Emily started crying before the judge finished speaking. Real tears this time, not performance tears, the kind that came from understanding that consequences were inescapable. I sentence you to 2 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service specifically working with elderly victims of financial crimes, and a requirement to pay restitution of $50,000 to a fund supporting elder abuse prevention programs. No jail time for Emily. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt cheated. Court adjourned with the mechanical efficiency of justice served. Mark was led away in handcuffs, his shoulders shaking with what might have been sobs or might have been rage. Emily approached me as the courtroom emptied, her face streaked with tears that looked genuine. Dad, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know. Emily, I held up my hand, stopping her mid-sentence. You made your choices. I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. Does that mean you'll never forgive me? I looked at this woman who carried my blood and Martha's eyes, but had chosen greed over family, betrayal over love. The answer wasn't simple because forgiveness never is. It means I'm still deciding whether the daughter I raised is worth forgiving, or if she died the day you brought those forged papers to my house. I walked away from her then, leaving her standing alone in the courthouse lobby with the weight of her choices and the echoes of justice rendered. Outside, Cleveland's summer heat hit me like a wall, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that courtroom. Justice had been served. My money was safe. Mark would spend the next 8 years learning that cleverness without character eventually destroys itself. But as I walked down those courthouse steps toward whatever came next, I carried the knowledge that some victories cost more than defeats, and some family wounds never fully heal. They just stop bleeding and leave scars that remind you to be more careful about who you trust with your heart. The drive home from the courthouse took me through neighborhoods I'd known for 40 years, past the bakery where Martha bought birthday cakes, past the hardware store where I'd purchased tools to build Emily's treehouse. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing it through different eyes. The eyes of a man who'd won a war but lost his family in the process. My house sat exactly where I'd left it, white siding bright in the afternoon sun, Martha's rose bushes blooming with defiant beauty, despite everything that had happened within those walls. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, keys in my hand, processing the strange feeling of coming home to a place that was mine again. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden next door when I stepped out of the car. She dropped her hose and hurried over with the excitement of someone who'd been waiting weeks to have this conversation. Robert, we saw it on the news. 8 years for that awful man, and your daughter cooperating with the police. You must feel vindicated. Vindicated? I tested the word like wine that might have turned sour. That's one way to put it, Martha. Well, you showed everyone that just because we're older doesn't mean we're easy targets. My grandson called last night to check on my finances after seeing your story on Channel 5. Inside my house, everything was exactly as I'd left it, but somehow different. The dining room table where Mark had spread his forged documents now looked like a battlefield after the war had ended. The living room chair where Emily had cried still held the ghost of her tears. I walked through each room methodically, reclaiming territory that had never actually been taken, but had felt violated nonetheless. In my bedroom, I opened the safe where I kept important papers and found them untouched. Mark had been confident enough in his forgeries that he hadn't even bothered to search for the real documents. The phone rang at 4 o'clock. Michael Green from the bank, his voice carrying professional relief mixed with institutional embarrassment. Mr. Thompson, I have excellent news. Your account has been fully restored to $1,347,000, which includes compensation for the inconvenience and additional interest accrued during the investigation. More money than I'd ever seen in one place. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, travel anywhere I wanted, buy anything that caught my fancy. But sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by family photographs that now felt like evidence from a crime scene, I realized that money, without people to share it with, was just numbers on a bank statement. Mr. Green, I appreciate everything the bank has done to make this right. Is there anything else we can do for you, sir? Perhaps we could arrange for enhanced security measures or a financial advisor to help you manage. I'll let you know if I need anything. After I hung up, the house settled into its familiar evening quiet. I made myself a simple dinner, washed the dishes, and sat in my chair reading the newspaper. Normal activities in a house that felt anything but normal. The front doorbell rang at 7:30. Through the peephole, I could see Frank Conover from the VFW Post, holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of a man on a mission. Frank, what brings you by? Heard about the trial on the Veterans Network. Figured you might need some company and a decent meal. He set the casserole on my kitchen counter with military precision. Tuna noodle casserole, my late wife's recipe. And before you say you're fine, remember that we've all been through battles where victory doesn't feel much like celebration. We ate at my kitchen table, two old soldiers who understood that sometimes the hardest part of war comes after the shooting stops. You did right, Robert. Family or not, you can't let people steal your dignity along with your money. Doesn't make it hurt less. No, it doesn't. But it makes it honorable hurt instead of stupid hurt. After Frank left, I sat alone with my thoughts and the weight of $1.3 million that suddenly felt less like wealth and more like responsibility. Outside my kitchen window, the evening shadows were growing longer, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 9 times. I picked up my phone and dialed information. Directory assistance. What city? Cleveland. I need the number for the Veterans Crisis Support Center. Connecting you now. Veterans Support. This is Jim. How can I help you? Jim, my name is Robert Thompson. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and I want to make a donation to help homeless veterans. A substantial donation. Sir, that's wonderful. Can I ask what inspired this generosity? I looked around my reclaimed house, at the photographs of a family that no longer existed, at the victory that felt more like survival than triumph. Let's just say I learned the difference between having a house and having a home, and I want to help other veterans avoid sleeping on the street. The Veterans Support Center occupied a converted warehouse on the east side of Cleveland, its brick facade weathered but welcoming. I'd driven past it dozens of times over the years without really seeing it, the way you ignore things until they become personally relevant. Jim McAllister met me at the front door, a man in his 50s with the bearing of someone who'd served overseas, and the compassion of someone who understood that battles don't always end when you come home. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. When you mentioned a substantial donation last night, I have to admit I was curious about the amount. $300,000? He stopped walking and stared at me like I'd just announced I was donating a spaceship. 300, sir, that's enough to house and feed veterans for an entire year. That's enough to change lives. That's the idea. He led me through the facility, past dormitory-style rooms where men and women who'd served their country now struggled to find basic shelter. In the common room, a Vietnam veteran about my age was teaching a younger man how to fill out job applications. Mark, my former son-in-law, threatened to put me in a place like this if I didn't cooperate with his scheme. Seemed appropriate to turn his threat into something positive. We completed the paperwork in Jim's modest office, surrounded by thank you letters from veterans who'd gotten back on their feet with the center's help. As I signed the donation check, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Martha's death, the satisfaction of making someone else's life better. Mr. Thompson, this donation will help us expand into transitional housing. Veterans won't just have emergency shelter, they'll have time and support to rebuild their lives. Driving home, I realized the house wasn't quite as empty as it had felt yesterday, but it was still too quiet, too full of echoes from conversations that would never happen again. The Cuyahoga County Animal Shelter sat on the outskirts of town, a low building surrounded by chain-link fencing and the sound of dogs hoping for second chances. I hadn't planned to stop there, but something about the sign advertising senior dog adoptions caught my attention. "Looking for anything specific?" the volunteer asked when I approached the front desk. "Something that needs a home as much as I need company." She led me to the senior dog section, where animals past their prime waited with patient dignity for families willing to love them despite their gray muzzles and slower movements. "This is Buddy," she said, stopping at a kennel containing a golden retriever mix with cloudy eyes and a gentle expression. "He's 8 years old, house-trained, great with people. His previous owner passed away and the family couldn't keep him." Buddy looked up at me with the wisdom of an animal who'd learned that life sometimes hands you unexpected changes, but that doesn't mean you stop hoping for kindness. "Can I walk him?" 15 minutes later, Buddy and I were sitting in my car, both of us processing the reality of sudden partnership. He settled into the passenger seat with the contentment of someone who'd found what he was looking for. At home, Buddy explored the house with polite curiosity while I set up food and water bowls in the kitchen. Having another living presence in the house changed the acoustics somehow. Footsteps and breathing and the occasional jingle of dog tags creating a soundtrack of companionship. The mail brought a thick envelope with Emily's return address and handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Inside, 3 pages of careful script that had clearly been written and rewritten multiple times. "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. Not just sorry that we got caught, but sorry that I ever thought money was more important than your trust. Mark convinced me that we were helping you, that you'd thank us later when your investments made you rich. I see now how stupid that sounds, how obviously wrong it was." I read the entire letter twice while Buddy dozed at my feet. Emily detailed her financial ruin, her crumbling marriage, her desperate attempts to find work with a criminal record. She begged for forgiveness, promised to pay back every penny, swore she'd learned her lesson about greed and family loyalty. At the bottom of the 3rd page, she'd written, "I know I have no right to ask this, but could you ever forgive me? Not for my sake, but because I can't bear the thought of you dying alone and angry." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer, with other documents I might need someday but didn't want to look at regularly. Then I reached down to scratch Buddy's ears, feeling the simple pleasure of unconditional companionship. "What do you think, boy? Some mistakes are too big for forgiveness, and some people wait too long to discover what really matters." Buddy thumped his tail against the floor, offering the kind of wordless comfort that money couldn't buy and family had failed to provide. The phone rang at 8 o'clock. Sarah Campbell from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of a reporter who'd found a story worth telling. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me calling. We'd like to do a feature story about your case, not just the legal aspects, but what it says about family, trust, and fighting back against elder abuse." I looked at Buddy, who was watching me with patient intelligence, and realized that maybe my story was bigger than just personal betrayal and legal victory. "Miss Campbell, when would you like to talk?" The newspaper photographer adjusted his camera settings while I sat in my living room chair, Buddy positioned loyally at my feet. Sarah Campbell reviewed her notes one final time, her questions designed to capture not just the facts of my case, but its broader meaning. Mr. Thompson, when you first suspected your daughter and son-in-law were trying to defraud you, what went through your mind? Disbelief, then disappointment, then determination. I'd spent my life teaching Emily about integrity, about family loyalty. When she chose greed over those values, I realized I had to choose between being a victim or being a fighter. Sarah's pen moved quickly across her notepad. You hired a private investigator before involving police. That shows remarkable foresight. Military training never really leaves you. You assess the threat, gather intelligence, then engage the enemy. In this case, the enemy happened to be wearing familiar faces. The interview continued for 2 hours, covering everything from my Vietnam service to Martha's death to the moment I dialed 911, with forged documents spread across my dining room table. Sarah asked thoughtful questions that helped me understand my own story better. What advice would you give to other elderly people who might face similar situations? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, even if it's family members doing the wronging. Document everything, seek professional help, and remember that age doesn't make you helpless unless you choose to be helpless. The following week brought a phone call from Channel 5 News, requesting a television interview for their senior citizen advocacy segment. Then the Veterans Organization wanted me to speak at their monthly meeting about financial security for aging members. Standing at the podium in the VFW hall, looking out at faces weathered by military service and civilian struggles, I felt the weight of representing more than just my own experience. Brothers and sisters, we've all faced enemies overseas. Now we face different enemies at home, people who see our age as weakness, our trust as opportunity, our accumulated wealth as their personal jackpot. But we didn't survive war zones and build lives just to hand everything over to con artists wearing family faces. The applause was enthusiastic, but more important were the conversations afterward. 3 veterans approached me privately to share their own stories of financial manipulation by adult children, caretakers, and supposed investment advisors. "Robert," said Bill McCarthy, a Korean War veteran, "my nephew tried to talk me into signing over my house last month. After hearing your story, I told him to take a long walk off a short pier." Driving home from the VFW meeting, I realized that my personal battle had become something larger, a warning signal for other vulnerable people, a reminder that self-defense doesn't end when you turn 75. The Cleveland Plain Dealer feature ran on Sunday morning, complete with photographs of me and Buddy and a sidebar about recognizing elder financial abuse. By Monday afternoon, I'd received 17 phone calls from people sharing their own stories, asking for advice, thanking me for speaking publicly about family betrayal. Tuesday brought an unexpected call from a producer at a national news program, interested in featuring my case as part of a series on elder abuse. Wednesday, a law enforcement organization requested permission to use my case as a training example for police officers. "Buddy," I said, scratching behind his ears as we sat on the front porch, watching evening settle over our neighborhood, "seems like our little family drama has become a public service announcement." The attention was flattering but overwhelming. I wasn't comfortable being famous for surviving my daughter's greed, but I understood that publicity might help other people recognize similar threats in their own lives. Emily called Thursday evening, her voice small and distant through the phone line. "Dad, I saw the newspaper article. I'm glad you're helping other people, but seeing our family's private business spread across the front page..." "Emily, our family business became public the moment you and Mark decided to commit fraud. I didn't choose this attention, but I'm not going to waste it. Are you ever going to forgive me?" I looked at Buddy, who was watching me with the patience of an animal who understood that some questions don't have simple answers. "Forgiveness isn't something you give once and forget about, sweetheart. It's something you work toward over time, if both people are willing to do the work. Right now, I'm focused on healing from what you did to me, not on making you feel better about doing it." The silence stretched between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. "I understand," she whispered. "I hope someday..." "Someday is a long time away, Emily. Maybe focus on today and making better choices going forward." After she hung up, I sat on my porch with Buddy until the stars came out over Cleveland. Somewhere across town, my daughter was living with the consequences of choosing money over family. Somewhere in federal prison, Mark was learning that cleverness without character eventually destroys itself. And here, in this house that was finally, truly mine again, an old soldier was discovering that sometimes the best victory is not the one that gives you everything you wanted, but the one that teaches you what really matters. The phone stopped ringing quite so often. The interview requests became less frequent, but the impact continued in ways I couldn't see. Other elderly people recognizing con artists. Other families learning to have difficult conversations about money and trust. Other victims finding the courage to fight back instead of surrendering. Maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not just punishment for the guilty, but protection for the innocent who come after. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.